So when I saw these buildings, I said, wow, these are like living architectonics. Basically, architectural forms floating in space. Now I'm going to really have a good time.
Dawn. South Beach. The sun. A sandpiper. The gulls. This scene where the ocean meets the sand is what first brought people to Miami Beach. But today the sun rises on so much more. Is this the dawning of a new day for as unique and intricate an area as there is in the Americas? Or is this the last day for Miami Beach's Art Deco district? Art Deco, as it's called today, was first recognized as a marriage of art and architecture, not in America, but across the ocean at an exposition in Paris in the 1920s. But it was in Miami Beach that the different styles all came together to form what is at once cohesive and fragmented. The Egyptian, Mediterranean, and the Mayan. Then came the mechanical era. It was the blossoming of the industrial age, tilting the scales toward the modern, the streamline. The ships, the planes, all blended together like hints of fragrance in a fine perfume. Apart, the fragrances are unique. Together, they are arresting. John Allen was arrested by the Art Deco district and is happy to be serving his time in the Pastel Paradise.
It's exciting being here on Miami Beach. It's exciting seeing all these wonderful buildings coming back to life after years of neglect. It's a great time to be here, and there's no place I'd rather be.
Aficionados of 20s and 30s, even 40s architecture will tell you the revitalization of the architecture here is not authentic. True, many of the buildings, say the Park Central on Ocean Drive, for instance, or the Imperial next door, they don't look the way they did when they were first designed, and they certainly don't look the way they did 10 years ago. They're alive, awash with subtle shades, blended nuance of palm shadows and pastel. In a decade, the Sleeping Beauty has awakened, amid controversy, out of economic rubble, and as a result of art. The art that these buildings sustained until they were rediscovered and kissed back to life.
The Park Central dates from about 1936. It's one of the most impressive properties on Ocean Drive with its triple lobby space.
With the awakening of the architecture came new life. On the beach nowadays, on almost any morning, you'll see people out walking, taking it in. They're not looking at the ocean or the sand or the beach. They're looking up at the intricacy of design. They're looking through the portholes at the palm trees in the sky. Some are carried back to another era, when architects and designers created a fantasy world, tropical, whimsical, bountiful, full of twists and turns for the vivid imagination. They come from everywhere.
Nee, het verschil is dat Raming, die heeft dat huis gekocht.
Johan van der Schie came from Holland to see what pastel does for Art Deco, and he'll take what he's seen here back with him.
Yes, why Art Deco? It's a style.
That it is, and the Art Deco of today began here. How did all this happen, this awakening of the sleeping, sun-worshipping beauty? Oh, make that beauties. Who kissed the district with color and brought it back to life? If we can point the finger at one man, that man would be Leonard Horowitz.
But it was built as a place to come forget your troubles and come on, get happy.
With a friend you'll meet later, Leonard drove to Miami Beach in search of something to save. They didn't know what they wanted to save. One looked at the old people in the decrepit hotels along the beach and wanted to help the people. Leonard said, okay, you help the old people, I'll take care of the buildings. And as he puts it,
I'll take care of the buildings. I'll do the frosting on the cake, because these look like they're going to be a lot of fun to play with.
at the time, 1976, Leonard was working with architectonics.
And part of my concept was to do paintings within my environments. And I was working with the pastels then. And I was doing a form of painting called architectonics, which is basically architectural forms floating in space with color delineation of the same color on each form, but different values to give it more depth.
And architectonics with a Horowitz twist began appearing on Miami Beach hotels 4 years later.
So when I saw these buildings, I said, wow, these are like living architectonics, and I'm going to really have a good time.
The Pastel Revolution was underway. Today, the paint on some of those pastel hotels has faded, and so has the controversy. But in the beginning, both paint and passion rocked the district. People said Leonard Horowitz was crazy, but not anymore.
Well, it feels, you know, obviously vindicating that this crazy person, that's what they used to call me, is being copied everywhere. I mean, I can't even get a building painted anymore before it's already being copied.
Today, they're everywhere you look, and the imagination is felt by architects and developers of the 80s.
I do some historic preservation, and there are lines that you should not cross over and lines you can cross over. And I think
Thorne Grafton is the grandson of Russell Pancoast, one of the original Deco designers here. Pancoast designed the Bass Museum and the Peter Miller Hotel on Collins Avenue. Do the pastel paint artists break the rules? Thorne Grafton says yes, but they're rules he, as an architect, would break himself.
Yeah, the pastel palette was not really here. You know, it was a much more conservative color scheme, but I don't really think the district would have been on the map today the way it is if it didn't have the electricity and the sort of modern interpretation of a 30 or 40-year-old district.
Well, I think we were blessed when Leonard showed up. I think that destiny has strange ways of working.
And Tony Goldman, one of the handful of gutsy, experienced developers who've come into South Beach and made things happen. Rules? No. Genius.
Leonard is a special genius. I think he's a special soul, a special bird, if you will. Rather than breaking the rules, I think he established the rules. By establishing the rules, you're setting the new taste level, the new aesthetic. I trust Leonard with the aesthetic. I think that Leonard is one of the only decorative artists that I know that I consider a fine artist.
It's not often that a fine artist is called upon to augment the art of the previous generation, but that's what happened here. The fantasy that existed in the trappings of this architecture had all but disappeared in the dirt and grime, the decay and crime. On the back streets of the Deco districts, buildings like this one had fallen into disrepair and become havens for junkies, until redevelopment came along. And then even the people who had lived here for years began to feel the change.
You ever hear the expression, you can't see the forest for the trees? You can live in a neighborhood like this for years and never notice it, and all of a sudden, it's all around you.
The first thing you notice is the way you begin to look at architecture. It's no longer just a building from the 30s. You begin to notice the shapes of the roof lines along Espanola Way, not just the pillars that follow the sidewalk, or the iron railings that take you to the back door of the Clay Hotel, Miami Beach's youth hostel. You notice more than the intricacy of the paint across the street. The green that's no longer pastel jumps out at you. A doorway makes you wonder what's inside. But it's the architecture that will stop you in the street. You'll tilt your head back and see something that you wonder if anyone else has seen. Say a block of orange sherbet that's not sherbet at all, but a piece of a building. And as the sun moves, the shadows alter the face of the architecture, and you see decorations above your head that you want to reach up and touch. And when the sun disappears on a place such as Espanola Way, the personality changes again. Small wonder that almost any movie company shooting in South Florida stops at Espanola for at least a couple of days. Where's Hitchcock? Where's Bogart? Maybe Errol Flynn. It's all a part of the fantasy that the designers, including Hollywood set designers, brought to Miami Beach in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Here's one fantasy that's become an integral part of the beach, the Deco district, and in fact the economy. It's giant ships that float upon the water and carry people to the Pastel Paradise. You see, even back in the old days, the cruise ships, the planes that flew in the high rollers, the trains that rumbled in from the north, were not just part of life. They became part of the architecture, streamline, and part of the art of those days, when Russell Pancoast designed the Bass Museum, built of limestone. On the corners were the gulls, and if you look closely as you enter, you'll see over your head the planes, the trains, the cruise ships from exactly the same place on Government Cut where people sit and sun today, where children threw rocks in the water 50 years ago. The scene is nearly the same. And so are the people, waiting for the giant hotels on the water to majestically make their way past. And then the people will return to their little hotels, for they are little by modern standards, and therein lies a stark reality within the fantasy. Is it that some people have a different vision of the world, or is it that they have no vision at all for what's already here? The destruction of the Viscaya in a fleeting moment, taking a landmark from the face of Biscayne Bay. Was that economics? Was it a lack of a sense of history? Was it political expediency? Is it just bad management? Whatever combination of the above, the Viscaya is gone, in spite of the protests of the preservationists.
We need to preserve every building that we have, because what we're preserving is the streetscape, not just the building. And it's the fact that they're together, their integrity of design.
The Senator Hotel, the cornerstone of a Deco streetscape on Collins Avenue, is gone too, like a tooth knocked from the bright smile of a middle-aged, if somewhat worn beauty. Age on a streetscape, like age on true beauty, adds not wrinkles, but class. Now class in desperate need of a dentist. And it's happening elsewhere.
And there is the idea that all of this is happening despite the architecture and the scale of these neighborhoods, when in fact, the changes are because of that.
Just north of the Senator, another decayed hotel, the beginning of the end for her, seen in the round porthole window, brick to square. Not picturesque or at all unique, but cheaper. Is Art Deco a square peg in a round hole? Is it no longer economically viable here along Collins Avenue? That's the word on this hotel, and the Webster across the street, and others in the immediate area, all scheduled to fall before the wrecking ball, taking with it not only the shreds of pastel paint, but the fantasy that the original designers built in. When one of those hotels disappears, its fantasy lives only in the memories and home movies. The wrecking ball took the hotel. Little girls can't learn to swim in vacant lots. Take this design over one apartment window. Look closely, and you'll see Ponce de Leon landing in the New World, greeted by Indian maidens who run the risk of being crushed into dust, loaded into a truck, and turned into landfill. Another vacant lot. There are more than a few people dedicated to seeing that doesn't happen. The preservationists have done everything but throw themselves in front of the bulldozers. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't.
The more we find out about it, the more we appreciate that it's a very complex and marvelous study. And it's not a simple matter of geometrics and porthole windows.
But they've heightened the awareness of Art Deco to the point that Barbara Capitman has produced a book with Stephen Brooks' photographs called Deco Delights. And Barbara is delighted.
I feel huge swellings of love and affection. When I drive around almost every week, there are new buildings that are being developed.
It was Barbara who originally came across the causeway from Miami with Leonard Horowitz looking for something to save. On top of the swellings of love and affection, Barbara has feelings of anxiety over the way some sections of the community are ignoring the tremendous resource that is the Art Deco district.
I see this as being an ever bigger battle, and it's unfortunate, one would think, with the kind of success that we're having, that we'd be home safe, but we're not.
One of the neighborhoods in question is on 21st Street, where you find the Governor Hotel with its nautical fantasy. Or is that a spaceship? And its economic viability. The hotel is part of the Quality Inn chain. Across the street, the Tyler with its new restaurant and its classic Art Deco architecture. This is a neighborhood that, even though it's obviously Deco, is threatened.
It's a living, breathing, evolving neighborhood. And we would just like to see that the way that it evolves doesn't make the very nature of it that we know that is driving it become extinct.
Just down the street is the newly expanded Miami Beach Convention Center. When completed, one of the top 10 convention centers in the country. The center is a monument to modern Art Deco, no doubt, but in order to have a convention center, you need Class A hotel rooms. In spite of the unique nature of Art Deco hotels, they're not ranked as Class A. That means Miami Beach needs a new big hotel. Well, make that hotels somewhere. We have big hotels, say the preservationists. Not economical, say the developers. Well, not all the developers.
You wouldn't ever think of cutting down a sequoia tree and busting up the redwood forest. Well, I think this is a national trust, in a sense, and a national resource, and it shouldn't be messed around with either. It should be preserved. You shouldn't.
Here's one of the men who discovered and revived Soho, who's doing the same thing here on Miami Beach.
And that's what's interesting about this area, that there's a personage to this community. There's a soul to it. There's an individuality. and that you won't find places like this anywhere in the world.
And there is the principal point to all of this. Back to 21st Street and what's no doubt the most photographed building in South Florida, the Plymouth Hotel. It's the epitome of Art Deco, a shape, a color scheme, on the surface serving no useful purpose. But looking deeper, you realize that the Plymouth Tower is not just part of the building, it is the building. It's what attracts people to the building. Without the tower, the Plymouth would be just another little hotel. With it, it's the subject of photographic, artistic endeavor. It's also the home of the musicians of the New World Symphony, and yes, you can hear them out in the street. Rather than detract from the ambiance of the area, the symphonic soliloquy from a Plymouth hotel room adds to the magic of the street. It draws people like a magnet and foretells the changing times. In the Plymouth, the young. Across the street at the Abbey, people who remember the Great War as if it was yesterday. Do the young and old coexist? Is the Deco district somewhat chameleon-esque? Can it change its color and shape to match the needs of the people who are using it? Well, look at it this way. On the face of the Abbey Hotel is a Deco sculpture of remarkable beauty. Some people will tell you the subject of the sculpture is an alligator. Others will say no, it's a chameleon. The art is whatever you want it to be, and so is the beach. A good example is found just a block away from the Plymouth and Abbey, another chameleon on the side of one of the most successful nightclubs on the beach. One day, modern artist Peter Max creates on the wall of Club New. Drive by a couple of months later, and street artists have usurped the place on the wall with modern ideas of their own. Gauche, you say?
I wouldn't want to restrict an artist from being able to express themselves on a building if it's done within the boundaries of good taste.
Will the street art be viewed 10 years from now as Deco is today? Not this street art, because with the passing of an evening and another neon night at Club New, the street art has disappeared. Gone, but for the chameleon, who seems to be waiting, watching, to see which way the Deco district will turn next.
I think it's right now, Miami Beach is establishing itself as the third major international city of America. And I think if we look at it that way and mix through an American style, we'll realize something very, very special and long-lasting.
What exactly is this endangered architecture, and what is this fantasy? First, the easy part. The fantasy is anything you want to make it. From this porthole in the side of not a ship, but a building overlooking an alley, to the crankshaft on the side of this hotel. The idea is to transport people somewhere else. Ask Thorne Grafton why the architects added such window dressing to what otherwise would have been plain, even austere architecture. Thorne says it's the icons, or symbols.
Let's get some immediate reaction from the people who are using this architecture. Get them bound into the architecture immediately. Let's make them relate to it. And the pictures and the symbols and the plaster casts and the bathing beauties and all of that was appliqued to the building to elicit immediate response.
The response at the time was that the hotel's filled. Even on the back streets where little buildings like the Sundial on Euclid Avenue have now been redone, there was a thriving community, and that fantasy architecture, the dressing of the little buildings to make them look, if not bigger, at least beautiful, the pastel is the icing on the cake. It's at places like the Sundial that those who look closely will begin to feel the spirit of the Art Deco district. You've seen the Moorish detail in the roofline and the pillars. Now look at the chessboard out front, and on the pedestal, the face of a child. So subtle, most of the neighbors don't even know it's there. More fantasy. Let's go back to Ocean Drive to the Amsterdam Palace, now condos and a replica of the home of Christopher Columbus. The closer you look, the more you feel stirrings of vague memories you can't quite latch onto. Maybe it's that instead of 15th century architecture, this is really 20th century architecture made to look like 1500. The first fantasy, then the architecture adapted. And next to the Amsterdam, you'll see what's come to be known by most as Art Deco.
No, there's no one-word description for something that complex. I mean, there's a whole tree of life of Art Deco.
Leonard Horowitz says it really wasn't called Art Deco until the 60s. It was such a mix of architectural styles.
It was called Streamline, it was called Modernism, it was called Zigzag Modern, and then you have the Egyptian influence, the Mayan influence, the Aztec influence of the ancient civilizations.
The Aztec and Mayan are seldom divorced from one another, as the Fifth Street Fitness Center will attest. How many businesses have come and gone here? The architecture has remained, and the pastels have added that identification with what's become known as Deco. The streamline is perhaps the most identifiable. Its rounded corners and lines streaming along the sides of the building. Is it a ship? Is it a train? And along with the lines, the portholes, the lighthouses like the one on top of the Waldorf Towers on Ocean Drive. During the day, an odd piece of architecture on a hotel. At night, dressed in neon, the fantasy comes alive again. Not just a fantasy for a hotel, a lighthouse on a home on Alton Road that you can't miss. Nautical, yes, and the glass brick that's become the symbol of Deco. Again, that mix of styles, that mix of shadows and architecture. Across the street, yet another Deco touch. The beautiful tropical courtyard, mixed with the old English mailbox. The fox hunt is on. Just around the corner on North Bay Road, in the 50s, a reminder of the Gatsby era that started it all. Before we move on to what many believe is the gauche of the Deco era, remember, the rules of good taste change. The first building Leonard painted pink drew a lot of fire. Leonard Horowitz, quoting one of his detractors here, who said,
I hate that building, it looks like a whorehouse. And, and I said, what do you mean whorehouses are usually red?
That was said of Friedman's Bakery when it was first painted pink. Now the controversy is that Friedman's, now Watergun, is brown, and not a Deco pastel at all. Still, the beauty of the architecture comes out with a little help from Mother Nature. Now, remember what we said about good taste. Yes, there's Memphis. Most of us would shudder at the thought of living in a place painted the colors of this Memphis on Henderson Avenue. Its popularity here measured by its sparsity. Memphis and one Ocean Drive restaurant, a couple of other buildings. But even the Memphis has its nautical and tropical touches. Back to tropical again. The courtyards were another touch added by the architects. Remember, these buildings were designed before the advent of air conditioning, so to cool off, you hit the courtyard. It was a living, breathing, functioning part of life in the old days. The tropics is still here, and so is John.
If Bob Hope and Dorothy Lamour were looking for a location for another road show, this would be the perfect location.
Can't you just feel it? This is the courtyard at the Place Vendôme, another building in the Mediterranean style that's being put back together, piece by piece, window by window, and turned from a dump into a delight. Inside, there's a feeling of homecoming, a feeling of safety, a feeling of old-world presence that was designed in and still survives. There remains another Deco style relevant for our age, a style that amounted to prophecy. It is Space Deco. From the flying saucer in front of the Clevelander Hotel on Ocean Drive to the flying saucer streetlights lining the walk near the beach to what most people think of as the Buck Rogers hotels, the Delano and the National, fronting on Collins and running to the beach. The picture of the saucer sliding in and out to attempt a landing at the spaceport is somehow not all that hard to imagine, and the illusion of another world is carrying on even away from the facades. In the lobby at the Park Central, space-age lamps are on the walls. Space-age shapes expand beyond streamline into a new era. In the dusk, the Sterling Building on Lincoln Road Mall, now redone and nothing short of spectacular, has some of its thunder stolen, so to speak, by the spaceship landing in front of it. No spaceship in reality, but a bus bench. It's scenes like this that give the Deco district its unique flavor, personality. Scenes like this that are what make you want to dig deeper, to look back at what once was. Fortunately, on Miami Beach, the history is less than a century old, so you don't have to look far.
World War II brought a different kind of tourist. Thousands of soldiers were stationed here, and these hotels were converted into barracks. They came to fight for what became known as the Battle of Miami Beach. That's where Clark Gable was stationed.
Yes, Clark Gable and the thousands of soldiers descended on Miami Beach during the Second World War. Even the little hotels like the George Washington were filled to capacity during those days. It was an era that was to mark the end of Deco development in favor of the starker post-war architecture. Still, the war brought the soldiers who would later come back as tourists and relive some of the not-so-fond memories of their days in the sun with gas masks, maneuvers on the beach. The fashion of the era gave them a lift. The presence of Al Capone certainly gave them something to write home about, and Clark Gable sweeping the floor at the Collins Park was the subject of many a story for decades. In spite of the harsh reality of the war, it was still a time of fantasy. You could still walk up some of the Hollywood staircases, stairs that went nowhere and were just there so you could get your picture taken. Soldiers and tourists alike have to have a little escape once in a while. Those were precarious times, and precarious times for the development of Art Deco. When the war ended, so ended the development of the Deco district. The hotels were maintained, and businesses flourished even after Clark Gable left to go back to Hollywood. Decades after the Allied victory, you could still get a drink at the Victor and walk by that Pelican, now hidden behind an archway and a tree. You could still walk by now, but you won't get anything but the feeling that something needs to be done. And something is being done here. You might call it a metamorphosis. The bursting forth of new life began with an idea back in 1976. The first cocoon didn't open until 1980 at the Kenmore Hotel. Now the Pastel Paradise is the catalyst for a resurgence of life. The most spectacular changes, of course, on the most expensive piece of real estate, Ocean Drive.
And this is the Cardozo Hotel, believed by many to be the jewel in the crown of Ocean Drive. Hi, Selma.
Hi, John. How are you?
And this is Selma Grinald, who sat right here with Frank Sinatra during the filming of Hole in the Head.
It sure brings back great memories. It was a long time ago, though, but it was a lot of fun. But then I was sitting with Frank. Then again, John, you're much younger than Frank.
The feeling is a lot younger, too. On the beach, on any morning, camera crews, fashion photographers, and their models. Where do the models come from? New York, LA, and even South Florida. They are here because the word is out among the beautiful people that Miami Beach is the place to be.
The Art Deco district is just word of mouth, you know, it travels, and I came here and it's true. It's very laid back, it's very comfortable, and it's pretty. It's something different to look at.
This is a former Miss Maryland, here because this is where you find modeling and acting jobs in abundance.
You know, I went to LA and that was more hype than reality. This is reality, I think.
The faces, or whatever, in the modeling business would be the same anywhere. What's different here is the architecture.
The Art Deco, I think, is beautiful. I think it's great stuff, so I like it. So the architect is I think the mixture of it is you know, it's nice, the colors and combinations and everything. I like it. It's nice.
Yes, another model who came here because the Deco backdrop is providing new energy for the fashion photographers of the world. Not that the colors are restricted to the architecture. Sit in the sun and watch the creation of a piece of art you're going to wear. There is that feeling of potential energy, and people are attracted to that. It's like they're anticipating that kinetic burst that's just around this corner or through that porthole, lurking in the shadow play. Sometimes people come for vacation and never leave.
My girlfriend had graduated. She was living in New York City, so she said, "Oh, I'll meet you in Miami. Have a little holiday." And so we came here. I stayed for 2 weeks, and I got on my airplane to leave. And I thought, I really don't want to leave that much. So all I had was $20 in my pocket. Jumped off the plane, took a taxi as far as $20 would take me, and then walked down the beach for like an hour and a half till I found my friend. She saw me coming. She says, "What are you doing, girl?" You know? So let's just stay here. So we did. We're both still here.
The city fathers were very much against it, as I was. When I first heard Art Deco, I said, no, it's old, it ought to be thrown down.
Even people who've been here since the Deco district declined into oblivion are changing their tune.
What appeared to be old and decrepit has now become sort of, you might call it quaint and charming. Quaint and charming.
There are politicians like Ben Grinald who single-handedly secured such Deco masterpieces as the Colony Theater. It was given to the city to be preserved, to be brought back to life. It was a battle for the Colony, as it was for the entire Art Deco district.
It gives you a sort of an ambience where you feel like you want to go out and live. It's something for lovers. That's what I see Art Deco as something for lovers.
And it is alive. Take the Alamac, for instance, just a block away from where the Senator Hotel once stood. Developer Mel Schlusser turned the decaying hulk into a yuppie haven. The gentle curves of the building exude livability. Makes you want to dive right in. That's what the people who have to use architecture have always looked for.
I've got a vision of the future in terms of what I see as the total actualization of this district. I see this as our true American Riviera, with taste, with quality, no shortcuts.
In short, it's here. And there are more big apartment buildings and hotels, some of them empty, within just a few blocks that have the same potential. The San Moritz, with its columned breezeway and its high-rise driveway. The Royal Palm, weathering the sands of time. Not only are they here and misused, but their architecture is drawing people from all over the world. Young people who'd love to immerse themselves in the fantasy if only the hotel was livable.
Art Deco painting, it's nice to work with some real color.
It took a special genius to begin the Deco pastel trend, but it takes genius and money and energy to make it livable.
Well, I think it's like a diamond in a sense. It's almost like a diamond mine here. You know, the rough stones are here. It's a matter of the quality of the jeweler and the sincerity of the jeweler to come in, polish the stones, make the cuts where they are pure, make the product beautiful from outside, and then develop the inside with substance in product and substance of service and taste and design.
People who are interested in finding new culture, finding any culture, defining their own culture, they're finding it on Miami Beach because it's got all those possibilities. It has the physical scale and the physical energy that allows that stuff to happen.
What they're discovering is the mix of cultures in the Deco district. That's New York and Rio and Nassau, a tropical vacation atmosphere that's uniquely South Beach. With a wealth of Cuban culture here, including the food, something that for all intents and purposes has changed the way Floridians eat, you can't ignore the Cuban influence. In fact, much of the money that's putting the beach back together was brought in by people like developer Jerry Sanchez, who began the turnaround at the Edison, the Waldorf Towers, and the Breakwater. Now the artists are arriving, exploring, and buying, like Tekla Armstrong of the New York Opera. But because Art Deco is an endangered architecture, there's a feeling of urgency here. like that of an ice sculptor who must carve his vision with skill and with speed before the material he's shaping slips away. The question for most people who buy here and live here is not on the quality of life, but why they didn't discover it before. Once the discovery is made, there's no choice.
I like creativity, and it's so creative, and it's creative in a way that I don't think you see today anymore. You know, we put up glass buildings. We don't put up beautiful sculptured forms, which is what you're really seeing in an Art Deco.
To discover the fantasy, all you have to do is get in your car and drive through the streets, stopping here and there to cast your eye on some intricacy like the Washington Storage Warehouse. That's right, it's just a warehouse, but a warehouse decorated as you would prefer your home to be. And on top, the development continues. Soon Washington Storage will be a fine arts museum with an added touch of art at the top. Headed north on Washington Avenue, the old City Hall stands next to the new police station, both monuments to Deco in separate eras. The old post office, the first building on the beach to be rescued with help from the nation's capital. Spending your day in a car, you get a feeling for the city. The chess players at the community center exercising their mental prowess. One minute you watch the hand of a master move to mate. The next you watch the shadows creep across the barrel tile or take in the changing scape of the sculpting around the window. Glance back to the game for the next move, and you'll catch the eye of the little girl watching her father play amid calm, warmth, and safety. We'll not pretend that life here is idyllic, but in the Deco district, the crime is dwindling. You can feel the change in the rebirth of the nightlife. Neighborhood spots like the Island Club opening their doors where a few years ago you wouldn't walk when the sun was going down. Club New, which you've already seen, opened up where the old Embers Lounge used to be. A hangout for the stars in its day, it's a hangout for the stars again. Whatever the motif, Egyptian as it opened, or the modern style the Deco chameleon ordered. The return of the nightlife to the beach is perhaps the single most significant alteration in the way people work and play here. If an area can't come back at night, it can't come back at all. And the beach is coming back. That's neon, colored lights, and pretty paint. But in the midst of it all, you see what the Deco district has now that was missing before the Pastel Revolution. Buildings like the Helen Mar are now filled with young people who've come back to the beach. The migration is underway, whether it's just across the causeway from Miami or the people escaping from the frozen north to pick up a bit of the tropics and finding the business climate here is as inviting as the neon lights. One of those nights out to catch the theater, you'll likely discover the show begins out in the street.
Everybody who lives on the beach knows this is the site of the old Rolls-Royce garage. And if you use your imagination, you can probably see Rudolph Valentino and Al Capone waiting to get their car serviced.
Right on.
Just as the doctor puts a shine on the shoes, the developers are putting the shine on the Art Deco district. The theater that deserted the beach years ago is back in a younger, avant-garde form.
What are we celebrating, Pancho? Florida East Coast Line, Mr. Flaggo. Yes, indeed. On the birthday of my line, which runs all the way down to Key West, linking the entire coast of this fair state, bringing trade, commerce, visitors, guests to this coast, which only a few years ago was nothing but a desolate swamp.
The players could have put it in more genteel terms, but the fact remains that where there was decay, there is now life. And where there once was a Rolls-Royce garage, there are people who've come to feel the beat of the beach. You know the life has always been here, but it's been tucked away at places like Joe's Stone Crab, a place you must visit so you can brag about it later. Tell people how, when standing outside Joe's, you saw a spectacle like something out of Star Wars. except it was only a couple of 100 yards away. The Sovereign of the Seas makes it obvious to anyone who cares to look that the fantasy world weaving in and out of Art Deco is more alive today, more developed, more of a draw than it's been for 40 years. The mix of nautical and streamline and outer space is perhaps more evident looking at the cruise ship than it is anywhere else. The purpose of the architecture, like the purpose of the ship, is to take people away from their troubles, to transport them either emotionally or physically or both to another plane.
And I think that there's a destiny in the fact that it was left this way. Not just that people didn't want it, but it was, in a sense, set in a holding pattern for new people to discover it.
And so the Art Deco district on Miami Beach is delivered into our hands. What are we to do with it? Will there be a plan, one plan agreed upon by the developers, the politicians, those of us who will spend our money to use the district? Will the Deco district augment what's become an international city? Will the value of these pastels and architectural pirouettes endure?
The Art Deco style presents a classic backdrop to design, a classic elegance. There's a cleanliness to it, and it's a setup from the past to the present to the future.
100 years from now, the people who will walk these streets deserve to see the fantasy, touch it, live in it. Is this the sun setting on the last day, or the dawning of a new age in Miami Beach's Art Deco fantasy?
What we needed to do was to get that enthusiasm back, which I think we have. If you come here on a Friday, Saturday night, my God, you can't find a parking space. It's fabulous.
The value of Deco, one generation removed, is going to be much more valuable than it is today.
A clear vision of the future has got to be laid down in a planned form.
This crazy person, that's what they used to call me, is being copied everywhere.
The more we find out about it, the more we appreciate that it's a very complex and marvelous study.
I mean, there's a whole tree of life of Art Deco.